all these points of light, any one of which could reward lifetimes, not just one lifetime, but multiple lifetimes of study, of trying to get hold of the stuff of it. But the person who looks through the telescope, first of all, sees the vast expanse and starts coming up with questions, starts coming up with things to think about. It's not, in the same quotation that I read, said it's not like an open and closed book. Well, frankly, I'm in English. I like books quite a lot, so I don't want to suggest that we should ignore books as we're talking about asking questions. But this idea of a telescope is kind of germinating within me. And to think that a liberal arts education is one which allows us to look into and out through the vastness of the world we inhabit and start asking questions about it seems to me a fundamentally central way of thinking about what we do as students of the liberal arts. So that's the kind of image that I'd like to start with, because I think the liberal arts and the liberal arts education, that's all about the ability to ask questions, and by asking questions, to come to those answers. Now, fundamentally, when we talk about the liberal arts, we're talking about curriculum, which is by itself, if you just hear it, a really dull point, okay? We would hardly have many people turn out for a lecture on defending the curriculum. Although I'll tell you, there's nothing faculty fight as much over as curricular matters, because in fact, curricular matters are precisely the questions of what do we teach? How do we teach? Why do we teach? And when, in the current budget situation, when the Department of Modern Languages finds that because of the way the university funds summer courses, it can no longer offer reading courses for graduate students in, say, English and history, that's a curricular matter. And it's a closing off one piece of the university for those graduate students. When the English department says, you know, under semesters, we're really not going to be able to require history of the English language or bibliography and methods for our graduate students, that means we have just closed off some areas of exploration, we've closed off areas of understanding, we've closed off questions. Curricular matters are what we do here. And the question of the what and the how and the why are fundamental to the questions of the liberal arts. So understanding that when we're talking about the liberal arts, we're talking about curriculum, that's not at all a boring thing. That's in fact the center of our self-understanding here. But the more traditional and actually more stimulating place to go in thinking about the liberal arts is to go to etymology. I probably am so nice to hear about music and how it sees itself within the realm of music. I'm going to keep, talking about words and stuff. But there are two words, liberal arts. Now, let me start with arts, which is in some sense less interesting, because what it really means is not art so much, but as studies. So when we talk about martial arts, we're not really talking necessarily about art. We're talking about a certain kind of skill or a certain kind of study. On the other hand, I'd like to suggest that we keep one little corner of our brain available for thinking about studies as something that emerged from human desire to understand, human desire to think, human imagination, human creativity. And so even when we talk about martial arts or military arts, or for heaven's sakes, liberal arts, we're talking about something that emerges from the human mind, from the human imagination, from human attempt to understand. But the more interesting word, of course, is liberal. Liberal is that word that's related to all those really good words, like liberty, okay? And so when we think about freedom, about liberty, about liberating, about liberation, all of those words that have to do with being free people or helping other people to be free, that's what the liberal arts are about. They are precisely the studies, the skills, the creations of the human mind that are aimed to help men and women become free, to resist old repression, old authoritarianism, old autocracy, old power play, castes, family structures, all those things that keep people in their place, all those things that say you don't get to challenge for example, are students, what do you know? You need to listen to me and learn what I have to say. That's repression. Now, I tell you frankly and proudly, I'm from the 60s. The 60s was not a time when we sat silently and passively. It was a time when we stood up and fight. And some people, though not me, got badly hurt, got killed. When I think about the civil rights movements of the 60s, I think about young men and women, students, who fought against societal oppression and repression to ask the questions about what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what needs to be done, and fought back. The liberal arts are precisely those parts of the academic program that challenge us to question and to struggle and to stand together, to think together. And you know what? Even to bargain. Not even just to say, oh, well, you know, he's elected and so it must be okay. It's okay, he was hired to be president, she was hired to be provost, so never mind, I'm just a student. I pay my fee, I get my diploma, I try to get a job, who cares? The liberal arts are the things that actually require students and their teachers to ask questions rather than to simply accept the going rules, to close their book and say, here are the facts. Now here's an interesting thing. There's another group of learning things that are called illiberal arts. Now that's kind of unkind, really. The other name for those is the mechanical arts. Those are the ones that teach things like, that focus on things like agriculture, on economics, things that have to do with knowing the rights and wrongs, engineering, medicine. Now I want to tell you really explicitly that I would much rather drive across a bridge built by an engineer than one built by an English major. No question. And I want my heart surgery done by someone who was trained in medicine. I would like it if they'd been trained in the liberal arts first, but when it gets right into some of these very specific things, I really want people to have learned those very specific mechanical arts. But to come back to the liberal arts, to the etymology, to this idea of these being the things that create free people, whole people, thinking people. Those are the things that are needed by all of us, not just by people who want to build bridges, not just by people who want to become agricultural economists, but by all of us who want to be thinking, caring, struggling people. Now, in the 12th and 13th century, in the Middle Ages, the liberal arts were a very big deal. This was the basis of education. Early universities were fundamentally concerned with these 7 things. Julie White spoke about these, or somebody, a few minutes ago. They're divided into 2 groups. There's the trivium. Now, this is stuff I'll tell you I've heard about all my life and I never can remember, so you don't have to remember, but get the concepts, right? There's the trivium, which is thought of, it comes from the word 3, and it has to do with the 3 basic concerns. One of them is grammar, okay, which actually means the study of language. These are all linguistic categories. One is rhetoric. One is logic. Okay? So these 3 have to do with being able to read sensibly, thoughtfully, to be able to speak intelligently, thoughtfully, and to be able to argue logically, to make sense of things. Those are the 3 basic learning elements of the liberal arts. The other 4 are mathematical. So mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and music. Okay? So these are a higher level, but you don't get to the higher level without first learning how to read and write and speak. This makes sense, right? So the trivium are the 3 lower ones. This is the origin of our word trivial, I'm sorry to say, but it may help you remember the word. Okay. The trivium, the 3 basic linguistic language ones, and then the 4 higher ones, the quadrivium. Okay. These are the things that were understood to be necessary for all learned people, okay? Because those are the things that are necessary for free people. those who want to be free, as I said before, from oppression, from repression. These are the things that are expected of not serfs, not slaves, not peasants. We're talking about the Middle Ages after all. But people like you and me who seek to be knowers, who seek to educate and be educated, who seek to explore the universe through that telescope. There's one of the big project I'm working on involves manuscripts, and 12th century manuscripts, and one manuscript is in the city of Lyon in France. That's spelled L-A-O-N, but on the trains they say Lyon. So, okay, Lyon in France. And in the Cathedral of Lyon, a beautiful, tall cathedral which is decorated with oxen. The reason it's decorated with oxen is because it's up on top of a plateau, and oxen carried the stone up the plateau. And so they decorated their cathedral with the oxen to give thanks to those animals that helped them build the cathedral. In the cathedral, in the north transept, there is a window of the 7 liberal arts. This is pretty splendid. You make a cathedral and you've got one rose window with the Virgin Mary in it. You've got a lot of rose windows showing important things, and one of the windows you put in, one of the stained glass windows you put in your cathedral is the 7 liberal arts. What you have is philosophy sitting in the center of this rose. Philosophy, the love of wisdom. And around her, in roundels, are the 7 liberal arts. So grammar, for example, let's see, rhetoric is sitting on they're all sitting on, all these women are sitting on a bench, and rhetoric is sitting with a book in her lap. And grammar is sitting with a rod with which she can chastise the children at her feet. I would rather not think of it that way, but it's a charming image. And astronomy is shown with a bushel of some kind, and we don't know whether that's because if the bushel were filled with water, it would be possible to look into it to see the stars, an early astronomical method, or whether it's a reflection of the fact that astronomy helped to tell farmers when to sow their seed each year. But imagine you've got the liberal arts portrayed in a rose window in the cathedral, so when the sun is in the north, it shines through, eliminating those things which allow us to be free people. That's what the liberal arts is about, that sense of being inspired, being filled, being opened, being, illuminated, not just being taught the answers. So, what does it mean? How do we make sense of all of this? What does the liberal arts education do? One of the terms that we buzz around with all the time, and hardly ever ask, the really important terms, nobody wants to ask what they mean because you're supposed to know, and because they couldn't be defined. But the central thing we're all supposed to be teaching, it's critical thinking, okay? Now, what does that mean, critical thinking? Well, it means thinking, okay? That's what it means. And that's what the liberal arts are meant to do. They're to help people think, okay? And so, in fact, using the liberal arts, using one's mind to explore the world, here's our telescope again, to look out into it and to see the things that need to be questioned, and then to push forth, to puzzle out the answers. That's thinking, that's critical thinking. The worst kind of student evaluations, the student evaluations that ring bells everywhere, are the ones where it's not the ones, you might know this if you really want to do in your professors. If you say this person expects too much work of me, this will not work against your professor. If you say this professor comes 10 minutes late every day, that will work against the professor. But what will really do your professors in is if you say he only wants to hear his own ideas